Imagine the icy expanse of Greenland, a place so remote that for decades it was little more than a line on a map for most politicians in Washington. But deep beneath that frozen surface lies something the modern world can't live without: the metals that keep our steel strong, our turbines spinning, and our navies afloat. Now picture this. After years of U.S. strategists eyeing Greenland as a crown jewel in the race for critical minerals, and even a president once floating the idea of buying the island, the first big prize of 2025 has just slipped into someone else's hands. Not China's, not Russia's, but Canada's. And they didn't just win a contract. They secured a 30-year license to one of the largest undeveloped molybdenum deposits on the planet, backed by the European Union itself. The U.S. still chasing another deal, still writing letters of intent, still talking about strategic partnerships. Meanwhile, the drills and trucks heading for the Malmbjerg mine will carry the maple leaf, not the stars and stripes. This is more than a mining story. It's a geopolitical plot twist in the scramble for Arctic resources, one that could shape the steel, defense, and clean energy industries for decades. And in Washington, the question hanging in the air is simple: how did we let this one get away? To understand why this Canadian-Greenland deal is such a seismic moment, we have to rewind the tape. Greenland, an autonomous territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, isn't just a land of glaciers and fishing boats. Over the last 2 decades, geologists have confirmed it holds some of the richest untapped reserves of rare earth elements: uranium, zinc, and yes, molybdenum, anywhere outside of China. For decades, these minerals sat locked away under permafrost and ice, not because no one wanted them, but because the cost and complexity of extraction were staggering. Harsh weather, lack of roads or ports, strict environmental rules, and a population of fewer than 60,000 meant few projects could realistically move forward. Then came the 2000s and 2000s, the global tech boom, the clean energy revolution, and the cold realization in Western capitals that their supply chains for critical minerals were dangerously dependent on geopolitical rivals. In the United States, the wake-up call came loudest during the Trump administration, when rare earth imports from China were threatened in the middle of a trade war. That's when President Trump made his now famous and widely ridiculed suggestion: why don't we just buy Greenland? While the idea of purchasing the island was quickly dismissed by Denmark, it made one thing crystal clear: Washington had Greenland on its radar. Over the years, U.S. officials, including from the State Department and Department of Defense, quietly explored partnerships for mining projects. They were joined by allies in the European Union, who were also desperate to secure non-Chinese sources of critical minerals for industries like defense manufacturing, electric vehicles, and renewable energy. Greenland's own government saw the opportunity too. In its Mineral Resources Strategy 2025 to 2029, it spelled out a plan to diversify investment partners, court both EU and US funding, and join the Minerals Security Partnership, a Western coalition aimed at securing ethical, sustainable supplies of strategic resources. On paper, both Washington and Brussels were in the game, but in practice, Brussels, and by extension Canada, moved faster. While U.S. financing agencies were still in the letters of intent stage for a separate rare earth project, Canada's Greenland Resources Inc. came to the table with the Malmbjerg molybdenum project, a shovel-ready mine with a completed feasibility study, environmental approvals, and a guaranteed buyer in Europe. That combination was irresistible, and in the summer of 2025, Greenland's government made it official: a 30-year license for the Canadian operator, giving them the keys to one of the largest undeveloped molybdenum deposits in the Arctic, a project capable of supplying about a quarter of Europe's molybdenum needs once operational. Let's start with the project itself, Malmbjerg. Located in eastern Greenland, it's a remote site surrounded by ice and mountains, accessible only during the short Arctic summer. On paper, it's an engineer's nightmare. In reality, it's a mining executive's dream. Measured and indicated resources of roughly 281 million tons at 0.18% molybdenum disulfide, translating to around 661 million pounds of contained molybdenum. A feasibility study by Tetra Tech in 2022 pegged the capital cost at about $820 million US, steep but realistic for a project of this size in Arctic conditions. Once in production, the mine is expected to churn out roughly 32.8 million pounds of molybdenum concentrate per year, enough to supply around 25% of Europe's annual molybdenum demand. Why molybdenum matters? If you've never heard of it, you're not alone. It's not as famous as lithium or cobalt, but molybdenum is essential for strengthening steel, making it resistant to heat and corrosion. That makes it a critical ingredient for military-grade armor, naval ship hulls, aircraft parts, oil and gas pipelines, and the massive steel components in wind turbines. Without it, steel becomes weaker, more brittle, and less reliable under stress. And here's where geopolitics kicks in. China controls a major share of the world's molybdenum production. Earlier this year, Beijing tightened export controls on certain molybdenum products, sending prices climbing. By mid-2025, spot moly prices in Rotterdam were hovering around $22 to $23 per pound, with futures pointing higher, a clear sign the market expects tight supply. For Europe, the timing couldn't be better. Their green energy transition is steel-hungry, their defense sector is quietly ramping up procurement, and they've learned the hard way, after Russia's invasion of Ukraine, that relying on adversaries for critical inputs is a recipe for disaster. By securing Malmberg, the EU locks in a friendly, stable supply line for decades. And for Canada, this isn't just another overseas investment. It's a chance to cement its reputation as a leader in ethical, ESG-compliant mining, a reputation that plays extremely well with European regulators. Canada already has deep ties to Greenland's mining scene, but this project gives it a geopolitical edge. Where's the US in all this? Washington isn't absent. Far from it. The U.S. Export-Import Bank recently issued a $120 million letter of intent for financing the Tanbreeze rare earth project in southern Greenland. That's significant, especially for breaking China's rare earth dominance, but it's a different mineral, a different operator, and a different timeline. Molybdenum from Malmberg? That's not on America's ledger, and in the race for critical metals, every year of delay is a strategic disadvantage. So, while U.S. policymakers are still talking about strategic Arctic engagement, Canada and the EU are already pouring the metaphorical concrete. Winners first. At the top of the board is Canada. Not just Greenland resources, but an entire ecosystem of engineering firms, Arctic logistics providers, and equipment suppliers that will ride this project from pre-construction to full production. Securing a flagship Arctic mine outside Canada's borders cements Ottawa's brand. Reliable, ESG-driven, bankable. That reputation travels well in European capitals, deciding where to anchor their next decade of industrial policy. Right beside Canada is the European Union. Malmberg isn't a vanity trophy, it's an insurance policy. Europe has learned painfully that strategic inputs concentrated in the hands of rivals can turn into political weapons. A steady allied source of molybdenum fortifies Europe's steel value chain, from naval armor to wind turbine towers, exactly where the bloc is investing billions. Don't overlook Greenland itself. A 30-year license means royalties, local jobs, vocational training, and hard infrastructure that outlasts any single mine. Airstrips, seasonal ports, power solutions, broadband. Crucially, the government keeps leverage. Tight environmental conditions, staged approvals, and the ability to pause if operators miss milestones. If managed well, Greenland converts geology into negotiating power. Now the losers, or at least the late arrivals. The United States didn't lose Greenland, but it did miss the first big swing at Arctic moly. Washington's focus and financing signals are lining up behind a different prize, rare earths. That matters, but it doesn't substitute for molybdenum in steel. In strategic materials, sequence matters. The offtakes you secure in 2025 shape the factories you can build in 2027. There's also a quiet loser in price-sensitive industries worldwide. When supply tightens or diversifies at higher cost, Arctic logistics aren't cheap. Downstream users feel it. Think oil and gas tubing, heavy machinery, and shipyards budgeting projects years ahead. If spot prices grind sideways to up, procurement teams will be rewriting spreadsheets, and finally, China's soft leverage slips a notch. No, Malmberg doesn't dethrone Beijing in molybdenum overnight, but every credible non-Chinese source dulls the edge of export controls. The more Europe and its allies can point to diversified supply, the less vulnerable they are to policy shocks. The upshot? Canada and the EU just banked durable optionality. The US still has cards, especially in rare earths, but it's playing catch-up on this particular metal. The clock is already ticking. Under the terms of Greenland's license, Malmberg must begin production before the end of 2028, unless an extension is granted. That's less than 4 years to build infrastructure in one of the most unforgiving climates on Earth. If Greenland Resources and its partners can hit that mark, Europe's molybdenum supply chain will be fundamentally altered for decades. For Canada, success here could set the stage for more Arctic deals, possibly even joint ventures with Greenland on other critical minerals. For the EU, it's a tangible win in its race to secure the raw materials needed for defense, green energy, and heavy industry. And for the United States, this should be a flashing warning light. In the scramble for strategic resources, delay means watching your allies sign the contracts you wanted. The next few years will decide whether Malmberg becomes a model for Arctic cooperation or a cautionary tale of over-promising in extreme conditions. One thing's certain, this deal has redrawn the map of critical mineral politics. And in Washington, Ottawa, and Brussels, people will be watching every shipment of molybdenum that sails out of Greenland's icy waters. If you found this breakdown useful, make sure you hit like, subscribe for more deep dives into the economics shaping our world, and share this with anyone who still thinks Arctic mining is a far-off fantasy. The game is on, and the stakes are only getting higher.